Hi boys and girls, this week we are going to be reading a story called Kumac's Fish. So before we begin our lesson today, what I need you to do is I need you to go get your reading textbooks, scrap paper, and a pencil. So go ahead and pause the video and go ahead and get all of those items. Okay, I would like you to get out your reading textbook and turn to page 94. Page 94. When you get there, your page should look just like mine. Now, in our story last week, What About Me?, our target comprehension skill was sequence. Well, this week, we actually have the same target skill. This week, it will also be sequence. We know that sequence is the order in which events happen in the story. So as we read, sometimes the author will give us clue words to help us with sequencing, putting the story in order. And sometimes the author provides us with clue words, such as first, next, then, after that, and finally. Now, those are just some examples of some clue sequence words. There's many more sequence words that an author may sometimes use. Now, we know from learning sequence last week that an author doesn't always have to use sequence words in their writing. Sometimes what we need to do is we need to think about what happened at the beginning of the story, the middle of the story, and at the end of the story. Now, something that would help us with that is another target skill that we're going to be looking at. And that target skill is visualize. You might also hear the term visualization. When we visualize something, I always think of my eyes. Vision, visualize, okay? But when we're reading or trying to visualize something, we actually form a picture in our mind, okay? This will help you understand and keep track of details what you read, all right? Something that I'm going to show you is, I'm going to show you this poster that I made, and it's actually of binoculars. Now, I made binoculars because binoculars actually helps us see. We see through binoculars. So you're not going to be able to see the entire picture because my document camera won't zoom out. So I'll show you all of it, but here's part of it. So the first one is visualizing, and you can kind of see my binoculars. Okay, and when I see visualizing, I'm picturing, I can imagine, and my mental images include, and then picture this. And when we use visualization, boys and girls, we use our five senses, okay? When we use our five senses, we can feel, see, taste, smell, touch, and hear. Okay, so that is visualization. So right now, just for a little experiment, I would like you to close your eyes, and I want you to visualize something as I talk to you. I want you to visualize yourself sitting on a beach. Your feet is in the sand, and the waves are crashing up on your feet. The sun is very hot, and seagulls are flying above you. Now, as I was picturing that, I can kind of hear the waves crashing. I can feel the warm sand on my feet and the water coming up on my feet. I can also hear the seagulls. Boys and girls, that's all visualizing is. It's picturing it in your head. in your mind and using those five senses. So that was just a little experiment, and we'll do a little bit more with visualization later on. But what I want you to do now is we're going to continue with sequencing and visualization, and I want you to turn to page 95 now. We're going to be reading a story. We're going to be reading a story called Nalukataq, the Blanket Toss. And before we get to that, as I read you the story, we're going to pause as I read it, and we're going to look to see if we can't find those clue words of sequencing. There's also a part in the story where I'm going to ask you to think about it. Picture it in your mind, what's happening in the story. Okay, so go ahead and turn to page 95. Okay, so here's our story, Nalukataq, the Blanket Toss. I'm going to read it to you. Please follow along as I read it to you, and let's look for those clue words. As we look for those clue words, I want you to really pay attention because after we're finished reading the story, we're going to fill out a sequence chart together, okay? All right, here we go. It says, it is the end of June in Wainwright, Alaska. The whole village has come together for Nalukataq. This is a celebration of a good whale hunting season. The people are glad that the whaling crew has returned. The event begins with visiting and a big feast. I see a clue word, begins. Then there are games followed by the music and dancing that go late into the night. One of the games is the blanket toss. In fact, the celebration is named for this event. I'm going to pause right there, boys and girls, because I heard a lot of sequencing words. So I heard the word begins, I heard then, followed by. Those are all sequencing words, boys and girls. Now this next part, I would like you to visualize. I want you to picture it in your mind. Here we go. The Nalukataq is a large round blanket made from walrus or seal skins. It has heavy rope handles. First, about 15 people come together around the blanket. They lift it up. Are you visualizing it? Then a person stands in the middle. The people holding the blanket toss and catch the person. The first jumper is always the captain of the crew that killed the whale. The tradition comes from long ago. The blanket toss was once used in hunting. While a hunter was high in the air, he could see into the distance to find whales. Now, when they explained how they did the blanket toss, they also used sequencing words. Okay? But I really wanted you at that part to visualize people holding this big, heavy skin of walrus and seal skins. And they have rope handles. And they all have to lift it together. And someone's in the middle, and then they push it up with their hands, and they toss the person in the air. Did you imagine that in your mind? Did you use visualization? Great job, boys and girls. What I want you to do now is I would like you to get out your scrap paper and pencil. So go ahead and pause the video and get that out now. Okay, boys and girls, so what I'd like you to do now is we have our scrap piece of paper and a pencil if you're at home. If you're at school, you might have a paper that looks like this, Nalukataq, the Blanket Toss. Now, we used our visualization in the story when we visualized how they did the blanket toss. Now, we're also going to put that into sequence. If you look on page 95, it does give you clue words as to what happened first. I'm just going to show you right here. It says first, if you can find that clue word. It says first, about 15 people come together around the blanket. So that's the first thing that we need to write. we're going to sequence how to do the blanket toss. So first, about 15 people come together around the blanket. Period. Then you have to ask yourself, what happens next? What happens after 15 people come together around the blanket? What do? Well, they lift it up. Then they lift the blanket up. So make sure you're writing this along with me. So if you're at home, you need to make sure that you're making this chart, this sequence chart, very similar to what we have here. So first, let's read this again. First, about 15 people come together around the blanket. Then they lift the blanket up. Okay, what do you think happens next? From what we read about the blanket toss, what would happen after they lift the blanket up? What happens? Aha! Yeah, then a person stands in the middle. Next, a person stands in the middle. So go ahead and write that. And what happens last? Once the person stands in the middle, is at the end of the blanket toss? Nope. What happens last? What did it say happens last? If you don't know, go back and be a detective and go look in your story. Go look in your story. It says the people holding the blanket toss and catch the person. So last, the people, let me scroll this up a little bit for you so you can read it. Holding the blanket toss and catch the person. So make sure you have that written. So there you go, boys and girls. We just sequenced how the Nalukataq completes the blanket toss. Let's read through it. And as I read through it, visualize all of the steps that have to happen in order to play this game. First, about 15 people come together around the blanket. Then they lift the blanket up. Next, a person stands in the middle. Last, the people holding the blanket toss and catch the person. So boys and girls, great job. You just sequenced the blanket toss. Remember, sequence is when we put things in a certain order. When we put things in a certain order. We order events that happen in the story. Okay? And remember, visualize is when you picture things in your mind. Great job, boys and girls.